Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Say thank you that your mongrel puppy is allowed to live here. My mother-in-law glanced askance at my son from my first marriage. Apparently, she forgot whose apartment she has been living in for 3 months now. I had to remind her. Carmen stopped on the landing in front of the door and took a deep breath. Her fingers nervously fumbled with the bundle of keys, feeling for that very one with the peeling green polish, grandmother's key to the apartment, which now belonged to her alone. "Marcos, come here. Help Mom with the bags," she called to her 7-year-old son, who was curiously examining the ancient mailbox on the wall. The lock clicked with the same characteristic delay as always. Carmen pushed the door with her shoulder. It still stuck a little in the upper corner. "Well, here we are, son. Now we're home." Marcos carefully stepped over the threshold, as if entering an unfamiliar place. The small hallway, the dim light of an old lamp under the ceiling, a familiar smell, a mixture of old books, lavender, and something elusive yet familiar. "Mom, everything's the same here," exclaimed the boy, dropping his backpack. "Grandma's apartment." "Our apartment," Carmen gently corrected, leaning against the wall and closing her eyes for a minute. The last few months had been difficult. The divorce from Rafael, endless arguments about property division, his new woman, because of whom it all happened. Carmen felt squeezed like a lemon. But now, in her grandmother's apartment, which was now hers and Marcos's, she felt the tension slowly releasing. In the evening, after putting Marcos to bed in the small room that once was her nursery, Carmen went out onto the tiny balcony. The 5-story building overlooked a quiet courtyard with a playground and old plane trees. She lit a cigarette, a habit that appeared during the divorce process, and mentally went back 16 years. Back then, her grandmother had taken her in, pregnant, abandoned by a student boyfriend with whom Carmen had been dating for only 6 months. She didn't judge, didn't reproach. She simply said, "We'll raise the child together." And they did, until her grandmother's death 3 years ago. By that time, Carmen had managed to get on her feet, find a job, and marry Rafael. They rented out the apartment and lived in a new building bought on a mortgage in her husband's name. Now that house went to him, and she returned here to the only place where she always felt protected. The old 2-room apartment in a brick 5-story building became her life raft. Carmen stubbed out her cigarette and looked at the dark windows of her neighbors. Everything in this house was familiar down to the smallest details: the creaking staircase, the smell of roast from the apartment below, where an eternally silent couple of retirees lived, children's voices from the playground, a quiet harbor, a place of power. "Mom, can I go to the store for bread by myself? I'm a big boy now." Marcos was jumping with impatience. A week had passed since their move, and he quickly got used to the new place. "The store is across the road, Marcos. First, we need to learn how to cross it properly," smiled Carmen, combing her son's unruly hair. She took him to a new school, got a job closer to home as an accountant in a small company. Life was gradually getting better. In the evenings, she and Marcos looked through grandmother's old photo albums, and Carmen told him stories from her childhood. "Here I am at 4 years old. See what funny pigtails I had? And this is Grandma at the dacha. Look what tomatoes she grew." Marcos enthusiastically absorbed every word, every detail of her past, which was now becoming part of their common present. She met Pablo 6 months after moving, in a nearby library. He approached when Carmen, frowning, was choosing between 2 detective novels. "I recommend this one." He pointed to a book in a dark blue cover. "The ending is unexpected." Carmen looked up and saw a tall man with attentive brown eyes and barely noticeable gray at his temples. "Thank you. I love when an author knows how to surprise." She smiled, feeling slightly embarrassed. "Pablo?" He simply introduced himself. "Carmen." They chatted at the book checkout counter. It turned out that Pablo taught history at a nearby college. He spoke passionately, with humor. For the first time since the divorce, Carmen felt something like interest in a man. "How about some coffee?" he suggested when they left the library. "There's a nice place around the corner." Carmen hesitated. At home, Marcos had returned from school. "Another time?" she suggested uncertainly. "My son is waiting." Pablo didn't look disappointed. "Then perhaps we could exchange phone numbers? I would enjoy continuing our conversation about books." Their relationship developed slowly. First, rare meetings in the same coffee shop, conversations about everything. Then walks in the park, sometimes with Marcos. At first, the boy was wary of his mother's new acquaintance, but Pablo found an approach. He brought him a book about dinosaurs and then started taking him fishing. Carmen watched her son thawing in Pablo's presence and felt her own wariness receding. This man was unlike her ex, calm, solid, reliable. 7 months after they met, Pablo stayed overnight for the first time, and 2 months later, he suggested moving in together. "I understand this is your home," he said, stroking her shoulder. They were lying in bed after dinner, which they had prepared together. "And I don't want to disturb this harmony. It's just, I want to be with you and Marcos." Carmen pressed closer to him. "I want that too," she whispered. "Carmen, I have a problem. We need to talk." Pablo's voice on the phone sounded tense. They had been together for almost a year, and for the last 3 months, he had been living in their apartment with Marcos. "What happened?" she worried, putting aside work papers. "I'll tell you in the evening. It's about my mother." Carmen had seen Dolores only a couple of times, a reserved, trim woman in her mid-60s who carried herself with that special straightness that betrays former teachers. She lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of Madrid. Pablo visited her once a week, sometimes taking Marcos with him. Carmen didn't impose, sensing some tension in the relationship between mother and son, though Pablo didn't elaborate on it. In the evening, when Marcos was already asleep, Pablo silently poured himself tequila, a habit he rarely indulged in, only in moments of particular stress. "Mom is being evicted," he said finally. "The apartment is mortgaged. My stepfather took out loans before his death, put them in her name. She signed by power of attorney without even looking into it. Now collectors are threatening. We've lost the court case." Carmen slowly sat down on a chair. She knew that her mother-in-law had been widowed 3 years ago, but Pablo hadn't shared the details. "And what now?" Pablo took a big gulp. "She has no one but me. It's my duty to help." Carmen tensed, anticipating what would follow. "I'll understand if you refuse," he continued, looking into his glass. "But I need to take her in." "You mean here?" "Temporarily, of course. A couple of months maximum, until we resolve the housing issue." A chill ran down Carmen's spine. The apartment, her refuge, the place where she and Marcos finally felt safe after all the troubles. "Pablo, but there's so little space here," she began, trying to cope with the growing anxiety. "Only 2 rooms, Marcos in one, us in the other." "I know." He finally looked her in the eyes. "We could put a cot in the living room, temporarily, Carmen. I can't leave my mother on the street." His gaze was full of such pain and desperation that Carmen felt a pang of conscience. Of course, he couldn't abandon his mother in trouble. Any son would do the same. 2 months? She clarified. "Maximum," Pablo nodded with relief. "Then I'll figure something out. Maybe we'll take out a loan, buy her a small apartment." Carmen took a deep breath. "Okay, but warn her that the conditions will be Spartan." Pablo hugged her impulsively. "You're the best. Mom will be quiet as a mouse, you'll see. She understands everything." Dolores moved in with them the next Sunday. She brought 2 suitcases and a bag with some trinkets. At the doorstep, she awkwardly hugged Carmen, nodded restrainedly to Marcos. "Thank you for the shelter," she said quietly. "I don't know what I would do without my Pablito and you." For the first few days, the mother-in-law indeed tried to be inconspicuous. She got up early, prepared breakfast for everyone. She put away her cot, carefully folding the bedding, offered help with the housework. Carmen gradually relaxed. Maybe it wouldn't be as bad as she feared. The space, of course, had become smaller. They had to adapt to each other, coordinate bathroom time, consider the habits of another person in the house. But overall, the atmosphere remained peaceful. A couple of months can be tolerated, thought Carmen, watching how Pablo gently teases his mother, and she condescendingly smiles in response. The first month of living together passed relatively smoothly. Dolores kept her distance, trying not to interfere with the established rhythm of the family. Carmen even began to get used to her presence. After all, the elderly woman found herself in a difficult situation through no fault of her own. The changes began so imperceptibly that at first Carmen didn't pay attention to them. One weekend, returning with Marcos from the store, she froze at the threshold of the living room. The coffee table had moved to the window, the armchair now stood in a different corner, and the old floor lamp had disappeared. "And where?" began Carmen, but stopped short when she saw Dolores energetically wiping the bookshelves. "I've tidied up a bit here," smiled the mother-in-law. "It's much more functional this way, isn't it? And there's more light." Carmen swallowed her objection. Indeed, maybe it is more convenient this way. Besides, Dolores was trying to help. "And the floor lamp?" "Oh, that old thing." The mother-in-law waved her hand. "It barely worked, could catch fire any moment. I put it in the closet. Don't worry, I've picked out a modern lamp. Pablito promised to buy it next week." In the evening, when Dolores went to visit a friend, Carmen cautiously asked, "Pablo, did your mother talk to you about the rearrangement?" He nodded absently, not looking up from his laptop. "Yes, it turned out nice. It's more spacious now." Carmen sighed. The floor lamp was her grandmother's, with a fabric lampshade hand-painted. Not the most functional thing, but dear to her heart. She decided to take it out of the closet the very next day. However, the next day the floor lamp was not in the closet. Dolores, smiling guiltily, informed that she had given it to the janitor. She was looking for something vintage like that. And we have so little space here. Carmen felt a wave of indignation rising inside, but restrained herself. After all, it's just a thing, not worth starting a conflict over an old lamp. But soon, grandmother's curtains disappeared too, thick, with embroidery along the edge. In their place appeared modern blinds. "Those curtains collected so much dust," explained Dolores. "And dust can develop allergies in Marcito. I read about it in a magazine." Carmen gritted her teeth. "You could have asked me first," she said in the most neutral tone possible. "Oh dear, you're so busy," the mother-in-law gently patted her shoulder. "I just wanted to help." Pablito, by the way, approved the idea with the blinds. Of course, Pablo supported his mother in everything, possibly out of guilt, because it was because of his stepfather that she lost her apartment. Or maybe he simply didn't attach importance to such trifles. 2 weeks later, Carmen returned from work earlier than usual. A meeting was canceled. The door to the apartment was unlocked. Strange. Voices of Dolores and some unfamiliar woman came from the living room. "Well, Dolores, are you settling in at the new place?" asked a creaky voice. "Little by little," sighed the mother-in-law. "It's cramped, of course, but what can you do? Good thing at least Pablito is nearby." "And the landlady wasn't against it?" Carmen froze in the hallway, not daring to enter. "What choice does she have?" There was a strange note in Dolores's voice. "Alone with a child, without my Pablito, how would she manage at all? A divorcee, after all." Carmen felt the blood rush to her face. She slowly took off her shoes, trying not to make noise. "Look how everything is arranged here," continued the mother-in-law. "No taste at all. I'm gradually redoing it." She sulks, of course, but keeps quiet. The guest giggled. "Well, Dolores, as always, you take the bull by the horns." "What else can I do? I have to live here now." Carmen quietly left the apartment and loudly slammed the door, as if she had just arrived. When she entered the living room, Dolores was smiling welcomingly, introducing her to an old friend, Consuelo. That evening, Carmen tried to talk to Pablo. "Listen, maybe we should discuss the timing. When does your mother plan to move out?" Pablo frowned. Carmen, it's only been a month and a half. I told you, we need time to resolve the housing issue. We're saving up for a down payment on a small one-bedroom apartment. We? Carmen asked. Yes, I'm setting aside from my salary. Mom hardly spends her pension too. What about our vacation plans? And the bathroom renovation we discussed, Carmen wanted to ask, but remained silent. After all, one can't be that selfish. A person lost their home. Dolores clearly felt more confident. Now she not only moved things, but also actively commented on the family's way of life. Carmen especially took the brunt of it. "Dear, you should buy fewer ready-made meals," remarked the mother-in-law, looking through groceries brought from the store. "Such food reduces men's potency. You need to cook homemade, natural food." Carmen gritted her teeth. After an 8-hour workday, running around after Marcos, and household chores, hearing this was particularly unpleasant. "Dolores, I don't always have time for full-fledged cooking," she tried to explain. "When I worked, I had 3 men in the family, father, Pablito, his brother, and grandfather, and I managed to cook soup for everyone." The mother-in-law raised her finger instructively. "You just need to organize your time properly, not sit in these internets of yours." Carmen restrained herself, although everything was boiling inside. She needed the internet for work. She sometimes took freelance projects to earn extra money. But she had no desire to explain this to her mother-in-law. "Mom, why does Grandma Dolores say I can't play computer games?" Marcos asked one day at dinner. Pablo wasn't home. He was delayed at work. Carmen frowned. "What do you mean, can't?" "We agreed, 1 hour a day after lessons." "She said I'll ruin my posture and eyesight." The boy shrugged. "And that it's better to read books." "You already read," Carmen was surprised. "Why such restrictions all of a sudden?" "She turned off my computer today," said. "Enough degrading." Carmen put down her fork. Interference in Marcos's upbringing was already too much. After dinner, she resolutely knocked on her mother-in-law's door. The cot had long been replaced by a fold-out sofa, and the living room had effectively turned into her personal space. "Dolores, can we talk?" The mother-in-law was sitting in an armchair with knitting, another new acquisition that took up quite a bit of space. "Of course, dear. I actually wanted to discuss something with you." Carmen took a deep breath, reminding herself of the need to keep her composure. "Marcos said you forbade him to play on the computer, but we have a rule. 1 hour a day, no more. I control this." Dolores put down her knitting and smiled condescendingly. "Dear, these games destroy children's psyche. I worked in school for 40 years. I know what I'm talking about. In our time, children played outside, not these shooter games." "With all due respect," Carmen tried to speak calmly, "Marcos is my son, and I decide how much time he can spend on the computer." The mother-in-law pursed her lips. "Of course, modern parenting methods. My Pablito grew up without any computers, and nothing, became an associate professor. And now what? Children sit in phones from morning till night." Carmen clenched her fists so tight that her nails dug into her palms. "I'm asking you not to interfere in how I raise my son." "Oh, please!" The mother-in-law threw up her hands. "Just don't be surprised when the boy starts wearing glasses in 3rd grade. And anyway," her tone changed, became harder. "We all live in this house now, and the rules should be common." This was too much. Carmen felt her lips trembling with indignation. "You are here temporarily, Dolores. A guest, and it's not for you to establish rules in my apartment." "So that's how it is." The mother-in-law rose, her eyes narrowed. "A guest? The mother of your husband. A guest? If it weren't for Pablito, you would be sitting here alone with a child, barely making ends meet on your ex's alimony." "You're crossing boundaries," Carmen said quietly, feeling everything boiling inside. "You should say thank you that my son married you, a divorcee with baggage at all," blurted out Dolores. At that moment, the door slammed in the hallway. Both women fell silent. A second later, Pablo entered the room, holding a bag of groceries. "What's the conversation about?" he asked, looking from his mother to his wife. "Your wife considers me a freeloader," Dolores immediately complained. magically becoming small and defenseless, reproaches her husband's own mother with a piece of bread. What? Carmen couldn't believe her ears. I said nothing of the sort. Pablo frowned. Carmen, you know the situation is temporary. She called me a guest, continued the mother-in-law, subtly wiping a non-existent tear. After everything I do for you, cooking, cleaning, Carmen couldn't take it anymore. After you threw out grandmother's things, rebuilt the entire apartment, and now you're trying to command my son? Yes, Dolores, you are a guest here, and I hope a very temporary one. The mother-in-law quietly gasped and sank into the armchair, pressing her hand to her heart. Son, do you hear? At my age, such nerves. Pablo looked bewildered, glancing from his mother to his wife. Okay, let's all calm down, he finally said. Mom, I brought your pills. Carmen, can I talk to you in the kitchen for a minute? When they were alone, Pablo sighed heavily. Couldn't you be a little gentler? You know Mom has a heart condition. Carmen couldn't believe her ears. Pablo, she practically redesigned the entire apartment to suit herself, threw out grandmother's things. Now she's dictating how to raise Marcos. Why are you exaggerating? He tiredly rubbed his temples. Mom just likes to keep everything under control. She's lived like that all her life. Well, I don't want to live like that, Carmen retorted. This is my apartment, Pablo, and my child. Our apartment, he gently corrected. And Marcos is ours. I don't see a problem with Mom being concerned about his health. Carmen stopped short. He said, our apartment. When did it become their apartment? Pablo, I'm not against your mother living with us for some time, she tried to explain. But there must be boundaries. She can't dictate how I should live and raise my son. Pablo sighed. Carmen, just be patient a little. She's had a tough time, lost her apartment, living practically out of suitcases. Doesn't look like out of suitcases, muttered Carmen. More like settling in permanently. What do you mean? Nothing, she waved her hand. Just, when is she actually planning to move out? It's been almost 2 months. Pablo avoided her eyes. You know, with housing prices in Madrid now, it's not easy. We're saving, but it's not that fast. Again this we. Carmen felt a pang of irritation. She had long noticed that Pablo not only paid for his mother's needs, but also sponsored her small whims, new clothes, expensive creams, visits to beauty salons. And this while they had planned a vacation on the Costa Brava coast, which now was clearly being postponed indefinitely. Pablo, we need to set clear deadlines, Carmen said firmly. And a rule, while Dolores lives with us, she must respect our life and our decisions. Pablo sighed. Okay, I'll talk to her. Just don't get so worked up, okay? She's not a young woman after all. But the conversation, if it happened, brought no changes. On the contrary, Dolores' interference in their lives became more insistent. Marcito, don't eat those cereals. They're harmful. Here, Grandma made you porridge, she would say in the mornings. Carmencita, you should wear jeans less often, she remarked one evening. A woman should look feminine. Pablito loves when I wear a dress. Each such remark was like a pinprick, small but painful, and they accumulated day after day. Worst of all were the hints of ingratitude which the mother-in-law masterfully wove into conversations. Consuelo's daughter-in-law has 3 children, and nothing treats her mother-in-law like gold. But for some, even one extra soul in the house is a burden. Other children would say thank you that their mother-in-law babysits their grandson for free. And here, it seems like you help cook paella, but it's still not right. These phrases, dropped seemingly casually, pierced Carmen's mind and gave her no peace. Maybe she is really too demanding? Maybe she should just resign and adapt? But then she remembered how peacefully and harmoniously she and Marcos had lived before Dolores appeared. How they rejoiced each day in their small but cozy world. And she understood that she didn't want to lose this feeling of home as a fortress, as a safe space. And now, Nothing remained of this feeling, and there was no end, no edge to this situation in sight. By the beginning of the 5th month of living together, the atmosphere in the apartment had heated to the limit. Carmen felt like she was living in a minefield. Every word, every step could provoke another conflict. She carefully avoided clashes with her mother-in-law, working late and spending weekends with Marcos outside the home. It was like fleeing the battlefield, but the strength for open confrontation was waning with each day. Pablo intervened less and less in their conflicts. In those rare cases when Carmen tried to draw his attention to the situation, he would joke it off or change the subject. "Why are you getting worked up again?" he would say tiredly. "So, what if Mom rearranged your books? At least she dusted the shelves." Carmen looked at him and didn't recognize the attentive, sensitive man she had fallen in love with a year ago. Next to his mother, Pablo seemed to turn into an obedient boy, not daring to contradict. One evening, when Dolores went to a friend's birthday, Carmen decided on a serious conversation. "Pablo, this can't continue any longer." She sat across from him, setting aside her laptop with work documents. "We talked about a couple of months, but it's been almost half a year." Pablo grimaced. "Here we go again. I explained, now is not the best time to buy housing. Prices in Madrid are rising. We need to wait." "How long?" interrupted Carmen. "Another 6 months? A year? 5 years? We no longer have personal space, Pablo. Marcos has started locking himself in his room because your mother constantly rummages through his things." "She's just tidying up," Pablo shrugged. "She controls his every step, checks his phone, dictates who he should be friends with. This isn't tidying up, it's invading personal space." "You're exaggerating." "No, it's you who doesn't see the obvious." Carmen lowered her voice, although the mother-in-law wasn't home. "She's completely taken over the living room, thrown out almost all my things, criticizes every decision I make, and now she's trying to dominate Marcos too. I didn't sign up for this." Pablo was silent for a long time, staring at the floor. "You're putting me in a position to choose," he finally said, "between my mother and you all." Carmen felt chilled inside by this wording. You all, not you. She and Marcos were in his mind something separate, not the most important thing. "I'm not asking you to choose," she said quietly. "I'm asking you to set boundaries. Explain to your mother that she is a guest in our home, not the mistress." "She is my mother, Carmen." "And I am your wife. And Marcos?" She faltered. "You said you love him as your own." Pablo squeezed the bridge of his nose. "Of course I love him, it's just, you don't understand. Mom has always been authoritarian, she's used to controlling everything. After my stepfather's death, she completely fell apart. And now she's finally come back to herself, returned to her normal state. I'm glad about that. And your family, me and Marcos, are we doing well with this state of affairs?" "You are my family too," he replied uncertainly. "Just, we need time for everyone to adjust." Carmen shook her head. 6 months, Pablo. 6 months we've been trying to adjust. It's not working. I no longer feel at home in my own apartment. You just need to be more flexible." He tried to take her hand, but Carmen pulled away. "I've been flexible enough," her voice trembled. "But I won't allow what's important to me to be destroyed. My home, my relationship with my son." The conversation ended with nothing. Pablo promised to think and talk to his mom, but Carmen no longer believed in these promises. Marcos became withdrawn, and this worried Carmen the most. Previously so open and talkative, now he increasingly remained silent, locked himself in his room, citing homework. One day, Carmen found his hiding place under the bed. In an old box from a construction set lay his favorite things: a player that Pablo had given for his birthday, several comics, a game console. "Why are you hiding this?" she asked carefully, sitting down next to her son on the bed. Marcos lowered his eyes. "Grandma Dolores said that comics are stupid and the console melts your brain. She wanted to throw them away." Carmen felt everything boiling inside. "She has no right to touch your things," she said firmly. "This is your room, your space." "But she says that her son supports this apartment, so now it's their home," Marcos said quietly, not raising his eyes. "And that I need to obey or they'll kick us out." Carmen froze. Pain and fury flooded her with such force that for a second her breath was taken away. "She said that? She actually said that?" Marcos nodded. "When you were at work and Pablo was at a conference, she said that we're here thanks to their kindness." Carmen hugged her son, pressing him to herself with such force that he slightly gasped. "Listen to me." She took his face in her palms, looking straight into his eyes. "This is our home, grandmother's, yours, mine. No one will ever kick us out of here, understand?" Marcos nodded, but doubt was readable in his gaze, and Carmen understood him. There were no guarantees. Pablo paid half the utility bills, bought groceries. Technically, this gave him some rights, but the apartment was registered in her name only. Grandmother had insisted on this when transferring the property, although Carmen hadn't given it much importance then. "Don't listen to what Dolores says," she said firmly. "And if she starts saying something like that again, call me immediately. Anytime." A week later, the tension reached its peak. Pablo left for a 3-day seminar in Barcelona, and Carmen and Marcos were left alone with the mother-in-law. Dolores, as if sensing the absence of a restraining factor, became even more domineering and categorical. "Marchito, you didn't eat the porridge again?" she said sternly at breakfast. "What a disobedient boy. In my day, children were punished for such things. No chocolate for a week." "Dolores," Carmen tried to speak calmly, although everything was boiling inside. "Marcos and I will sort it out ourselves. If he doesn't want porridge, it means he's not hungry." That's why children grow up to be selfish, because of such permissiveness. The mother-in-law pursed her lips. Pablito always ate everything to the last crumb. "Probably because he was hungry," Carmen couldn't help saying. "What do you mean?" Dolores's eyes dangerously narrowed. "Just that a satiated child doesn't need to be forced to eat." Carmen turned away, ending the conversation. In the evening, she stayed late at work, dealing with a quarterly report. She returned home late, around 9. Opening the door, she heard muffled voices from the kitchen. The mother-in-law and Marcos? "If I see this filth again, I'll throw it out, you hear?" Dolores's voice sounded harsh, with metallic notes. "And don't tell your mother she doesn't listen to me anyway." "But it's my thing." There were tears in Marcos's voice. "Pablo gave it to me. And before that, I gave it to Pablito for his birthday. And I didn't expect him to give away my presents to just anyone." "I'm not just anyone." For the first time, Carmen heard her son raise his voice. There was a sharp sound, like a slap. Carmen went cold. "How dare you talk to your elders, boy?" hissed the mother-in-law. "Is that how your mother raised you? To be rude?" Carmen flew into the kitchen. Marcos stood by the table, pressing his hand to his reddened cheek. There were tears in his eyes. On the table lay a disassembled game console, the same one from the hiding place. "What's going on here?" Carmen's voice trembled with anger. Dolores quickly turned around. Something like fear flashed in her gaze, but was quickly replaced by the usual arrogance. "A disciplinary moment." She straightened up. "Your son is rude and hides forbidden things." "She hit Marcos," whispered Carmen, not believing her eyes. "You hit my son." "A slap for impudence is not a blow," parried the mother-in-law. "In my time, I didn't hesitate to whip Pablito with a belt when he deserved it. And he grew up to be a decent person, unlike the current generation, which doesn't respect its elders at all." Carmen approached her son, examined his face. The imprint of 5 fingers was clearly visible on his cheek. "Collect the console and go to your room," she said quietly. "Close the door." Marcos nodded, hastily gathered the parts in his palms, and slipped out of the kitchen. Carmen turned to her mother-in-law. "How dare you raise your hand against my child?" "Don't dramatize, Carmencita. Normal upbringing." Pablito will understand me. You'll see. I don't care who understands you. Carmen felt a wave of such rage rising in her that it became difficult to breathe. You hit my son, in my house. After this, you have no place here. What do you mean, no place? The mother-in-law smirked unpleasantly. Are you kicking me out, or what? Does Pablito know about your plans? He will when he returns. And what will you tell him? That his mother should live on the street because of some trifle? Because of a spoiled boy who has long needed a man's hand? Carmen clenched her fists so tight that her nails dug into her palms until it hurt. Get out of my house, she said quietly but firmly. Pack your things and leave, right now. Dolores laughed in her face. Are you out of your mind? Where will I go at this hour? To my friend? To Consuelo? Or somewhere else? I don't care. I'm not going anywhere, the mother-in-law cut off. This is now my home too. Pablito lives here, which means I have the right. Carmen silently turned and left the kitchen. In the living room, she looked around. The fold-out sofa where the mother-in-law slept, the closet where her things now lay. Resolutely, she approached the closet, flung open the doors, and began pulling out clothes, dropping them onto the sofa. What are you doing? Dolores screeched, appearing in the doorway. Carmen didn't respond. She methodically emptied the shelves, taking out packages and boxes from the upper cabinets. Then she retrieved a large wheeled suitcase from the storage room, the very one her mother-in-law had arrived with for a couple of months. You can't throw me out, Dolores repeated, watching her actions. Pablo won't allow it. He'll choose his mother, you'll see. Let him choose, Carmen replied calmly, packing things into the suitcase. But you're leaving today. I'm not going anywhere. The mother-in-law tried to snatch some blouse from her hands, but Carmen held on to the fabric firmly. Either you leave on your own, or I call the police, she said, looking directly into the older woman's eyes. I have a witness, my son. There's a mark on his face from your hand. What do you think? Where will they send you for beating a minor? Dolores turned pale. She opened her mouth, then closed it, unable to find words. Finally, she hissed through her teeth, You'll regret this when Pablo finds out. He will find out, Carmen nodded. Definitely. Now get ready. You have 20 minutes. An hour later, Dolores stood at the door with her suitcase and bag, lips pursed. As a parting shot, she hissed, This isn't the end, daughter-in-law. We'll see who wins. Carmen silently closed the door behind her and leaned against the wall, feeling her knees tremble. What had she done? How would Pablo react? But then the image of frightened Marcos with his red cheek appeared before her eyes, and she knew she had done the right thing at any cost. She went to the children's room. Her son was sitting on the bed, intently assembling his game console. Mom, is she really gone? Carmen sat down beside him, hugging him around the shoulders. Yes, she is. And Pablo? The question was difficult, but Carmen wasn't going to lie. I don't know, son. When he returns, we'll talk. What if he leaves too? There was anxiety in Marcos's voice. Carmen took a deep breath. Then, we'll live together, just the two of us, like before. We'll manage, right? Marcos was silent for a moment, then nodded. We'll manage, but I would like him to stay, without her. Me too, Carmen admitted honestly. Pablo returned the next day, earlier than planned. Apparently Dolores had called him. His face was grim when he crossed the threshold of the apartment. Where's my mother? He asked without greeting. At Consuelo's, Carmen tried to speak calmly. Can we talk? What is there to talk about? There was bitterness in his voice. You threw my mother out onto the street? No call? Nothing. She hit Marcos. Carmen looked directly at him. In the face. Left a mark. Because he was sassing back. Pablo frowned. Mom said he was being rude and disobedient. And that's a reason to hit a child? Carmen couldn't believe her ears. Pablo, she struck a 7-year-old boy whom I have never in my life laid a finger on. Pablo lowered his eyes. The older generation was raised differently. And that's all you can say? Carmen shook her head. A justification for violence against a child? I'll talk to my mother, he mumbled uncertainly. I'll explain that it's not acceptable. Too late, Carmen cut him off. I won't allow her to return to this house, ever. Pablo raised his darkened gaze to her. Are you giving me an ultimatum? No, Pablo. Life is giving you a choice, or rather your mother by her actions. They were silent for several minutes. Then Pablo sighed heavily. I can't abandon her. She never abandoned me, even in the hardest times. I understand, Carmen said quietly, feeling her heart constrict. But I can't let her come back either. She threatened my son. She humiliated him and me. She tried to take over our home. Maybe some compromise. What kind, Pablo? What compromise could there be? Either she rents an apartment and lives separately, or... She didn't finish, but Pablo understood the unspoken. Or I choose who to live with, he said slowly. Carmen nodded, trying her hardest not to show how much it hurt. She loved this man, but she couldn't allow him and his mother to destroy what was truly valuable to her, her child's safety, peace in her own home. Pablo looked at her for a long time, then averted his gaze. I need to pack my things. There was no anger or accusation in his tone, just fatigue and a kind of resignation, as if he himself understood that there was no other way out, but couldn't act differently. While he was packing, Carmen sat in the kitchen looking out the window. Strangely, she wasn't crying. Inside was emptiness and a strange feeling of liberation, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. At the door, Pablo paused. In one hand, he held a bag with his belongings. In the other, the keys to the apartment. You know, he said quietly, I really did love you both. And Marcos, too. I know, Carmen replied, but apparently not strongly enough to protect us. He lowered his head, not arguing. Then he put the keys on the cabinet in the hallway and left, quietly closing the door behind him. Carmen stood listening to his footsteps on the stairs. Then she slowly approached the door and turned the lock. The click sounded unexpectedly loud. Marcos came out of his room. He had heard everything. Carmen knew this by his eyes, serious and sad. Did he leave? The boy asked, though the answer was obvious. Yes, darling. Marcos came closer, took her hand. It will be quiet now, right? Carmen looked at her son, and for the first time that day, felt tears coming to her throat. But she held back. She didn't want to upset him even more. Yes, it will be quiet now. She gently ruffled his hair. Let's go have some tea. At night, when Marcos fell asleep, Carmen finally allowed herself to cry. She was mourning not only Pablo's departure, but also her unfulfilled hopes for family happiness, for a strong and reliable union. It turns out it didn't work out again. Again, she was left alone. The phone made a message notification sound. Carmen found it on the bedside table. Pablo. Sorry it turned out this way. I understand everything, but I can't abandon my mother. Maybe when things settle down, we can talk and find a solution. Carmen looked at the screen, and in her mind flashed all the months of humiliation, all the attempts to protect her home and son, which Pablo had never supported. He simply didn't understand how important it was for her to have a place where she felt safe, and probably never would. She put the phone face down without answering. The morning after Pablo's departure was unexpectedly bright. Carmen woke up to sunlight breaking through the partially drawn curtains. The curtains, by the way, were hers, the very ones she had taken out of the closet where Dolores had hidden them. The apartment was unusually quiet, not that oppressive silence that hung when everyone was afraid to make a sound, but a cozy, homey quiet. Carmen stretched, took a deep breath. It hurt. Inside it stung like an open wound, but at the same time there was some strange sensation. Rightness? As if everything had finally fallen into place. The first days dragged on slowly. Marcos tried not to talk about his departed stepfather, but Carmen noticed how her son sometimes froze by the window, looking at men passing by, wondering if it was Pablo. One evening, she found the boy in the living room, looking at photos on his phone. Their fishing trip together, some holidays. "Do you miss him?" she asked quietly, sitting down next to him. Marcos shrugged indefinitely. "A little bit, but it's better without that old woman. She was scary." Carmen hugged her son. It's amazing how children sense emotional atmosphere, unerringly, without any explanations. "You know," she said, "sometimes people leave our lives, even if we love them. It's sad, but it's not the end of the world." "Like Dad?" Marcos raised his attentive gaze to her. "Yes, like Dad," Carmen involuntarily shuddered. They hardly ever talked about her ex-husband. Only Pablo isn't exactly like Dad. He's a good person, just has a complicated relationship with his mother. "She bosses him around," the boy said confidently, "and he's afraid to say no." From the lips of a 7-year-old child, such a formulation sounded almost funny, but Carmen didn't laugh. Marcos had hit the nail on the head. Pablo, a smart, independent man, simply couldn't resist his mother's influence. Perhaps behind this lay some old story, some deep childhood fear. But now it was no longer her problem. A week after the breakup, Pablo sent another message. "Can we meet? Talk about us? I miss you very much." Carmen stared at the screen for a long time, not knowing what to answer. Part of her wanted to agree, to see him, to hear him, but another part, more rational, understood that nothing had changed. Dolores was still there, their conflict unresolved. And if Pablo came back, sooner or later everything would repeat itself. She wrote a short "no," pressed send, and put the phone aside. Immediately came the answer, "Please, I've thought it all over. I want to fix everything. Fix it. If only it were that simple. If only she could erase from memory those 6 months of slow, methodical displacement, of turning from the mistress of the house into a tenant tolerated out of mercy. If only Pablo had stood up for her just once, had defended her right to her own space, to respect. But he didn't do that, and is unlikely to do so in the future. "I'm sorry, but I'm not ready," she wrote and turned off the sound on her phone. In the evening, she and Marcos decided to organize an apartment liberation operation, as her son jokingly called it. They walked through the rooms, finding and placing on the couch things left behind by Dolores and Pablo, a forgotten comb, some papers, a pair of socks, a phone charger. During the cleanup, Marcos accidentally knocked the shelf with dishes, and a ceramic cup fell to the floor, the very one over which everything had ultimately happened. Dolores's favorite cup, with an ornate gold pattern. "Oh," the boy looked fearfully at the shards. "Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Carmen expected a wave of irritation to rise inside, another broken thing, but instead, she suddenly burst into laughter. Loud, uncontrollable laughter which brought tears to her eyes. "Mom, Mom!" Exclamation mark Marcos looked at her with concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, son." She wiped her eyes. "Just thought about the irony. Remember how it all started? You broke this same cup and she didn't finish, but Marcos understood. And he smiled too, uncertainly, cautiously. "So you're not angry? About the broken cup?" Carmen shook her head. "Of course not. Wait here, I'll bring a broom." But instead of sweeping up the shards, Carmen suddenly thought, this cup was the last reminder of that period in their lives, the last material trace of Dolores's presence in their home. "You know what?" she said, crouching down next to Marcos. "Let's glue it back together." "Why?" The boy was genuinely surprised. "To remember." The next day, they carefully glued the pieces together with special ceramic glue. It turned out uneven, with visible cracks along the sides of the cup. The pattern was disturbed in places. "It's not pretty," Marcos sighed, examining the result of their efforts. "But it's interesting." Carmen put the cup on the shelf. "Now it has a story, like a scar after a battle." The boy thoughtfully looked at the wounded cup. "Can we drink from it?" I don't think so, Carmen smiled. It would leak. Let it just stand there, reminding us of something important. Of what? That sometimes you need to let go of one thing to get something else, something more valuable. Marcos frowned, trying to comprehend this adult wisdom. Then he simply nodded and ran to his room to play with that same console, which now didn't have to be hidden. Gradually, the apartment was returning to its former appearance. Carmen rearranged the furniture, arranged the books as she liked. From the storage room, she retrieved her grandmother's old things that had miraculously survived. Embroidered mantles, porcelain figurines, photo albums. She didn't even notice how a month passed after Pablo's departure. Just at some point, she caught herself thinking that she hadn't thought about him and Dolores all day. Life went on. Work, Marcos's school, household chores. And in this everyday life, there was its own harmony. And then, 6 weeks after the breakup, there was a knock at the door. Carmen was busy with dinner in the kitchen. "Marcos, open it, please," she called out, stirring the sauce. "It's probably the neighbor coming for salt. I promised to lend her some." A minute later, Marcos came into the kitchen, unusually silent. "Mom, there's..." He hesitated. "There's Pablo." Carmen froze with a spoon in her hand. "Pablo? Here?" She wasn't ready for this meeting, not at all. Neither morally nor even physically, in her home pants with hair gathered in a careless bun. "He's standing at the door," added Marcos, "with some box." Carmen took a deep breath, turned off the stove, and went to the hallway. Pablo was awkwardly shifting from foot to foot at the threshold, holding a cardboard box tied with a ribbon. "Hi." He looked unwell, gaunt, with shadow of stubble on his cheeks. "Hi." Carmen folded her arms across her chest. "What did you want?" "Can we talk?" He nodded toward the room. Carmen hesitated. Letting him into the house that she and Marcos had reclaimed was frightening, like opening the door to a potential invader. "Let's stay in the hallway," she said firmly. Pablo nodded, accepting her terms. "How are you?" he asked, looking Carmen up and down, as if wanting to make sure she was okay. "Fine," she answered briefly. "And you?" "Not so great, to be honest." He gave a cheerless smile. "Rented an apartment, not far from here." "And your mother?" "At Consuelo's for now. We're looking for a place for her." Carmen just nodded. She didn't want to discuss Dolores. Pablo handed her the box. "Here, wanted to give this to Marcos. It's a new console, the latest model, and games for it." "Why?" Carmen was in no hurry to accept the gift. "Just because," he shrugged. "I promised him once. And I also wanted to apologize. To both of you." Carmen was silent, not knowing what to say. Part of her wanted to forgive, to let Pablo in, to start everything anew. But another part, the one that remembered her son's humiliated look, remembered her helplessness before her mother-in-law's onslaught, insisted on caution. "And one more thing," Pablo took a small package from his jacket pocket. "I found this in my mother's things. I think it's yours." Carmen unwrapped the package and froze. Inside was an old photograph in a frame. Her with her grandmother, at about age 6, against the background of this very apartment. The photo had disappeared several months ago, and Carmen decided that it had simply been lost during another rearrangement. "Mom took it," Pablo said quietly. "I don't know why. Maybe she was jealous of your memories of your grandmother." Carmen ran her finger over the glass, feeling a lump rising in her throat. This photograph meant more to her than all the junk Dolores had dragged into their home. "Thank you," was all she could squeeze out. Pablo shifted from foot to foot. "I've been thinking a lot during this time. About what happened, about Mom, about us. I was wrong, Carmen. Very wrong. I should have protected you and Marcos." "Yes, you should have." She wasn't going to make his confession easier. "I let you down," he lowered his head. "And now that I'm living alone, I realize how much I miss you both. I would like to fix everything." Carmen looked at him for a long time. And your mother? She's still around. I found an apartment for her, Pablo said quickly. A small one-bedroom, but in a decent area. Took out a mortgage in my name. And what did she say to that? Wasn't happy, of course. He gave a sad smile. But I set a condition, either separate housing or I stop helping her altogether. She agreed. Carmen was silent, thinking about what she heard. It sounded reasonable, even right, but something inside her resisted. You know what shocked me the most? She finally asked. Not that your mother tried to take over my home, not that she criticized my every move, not even that she hit Marcos. Her voice trembled. But that you never, not once, took our side, as if Marcos and I were unimportant to you, secondary. That's not true, Pablo exclaimed fervently. I didn't know what to do. I was torn between you and my mother. She was alone with me all her life, did so much for me. And so she has the right to control your life? Decide who you should be with? Dictate how to treat your family? He couldn't find an answer. He just stood with his head lowered. Listen, Carmen tried to speak calmly, although everything inside her was trembling. I'm not saying you should abandon your mother. She's your family, and you're doing the right thing by taking care of her. But there's a difference between care and dependence. And until you find that line, I've already found it, Pablo interrupted. These weeks have made me understand a lot. I don't want to lose you. Neither you nor Marcos. You're my real family. Carmen shook her head. I'm sorry, but I don't believe that relationships built over years could change in 6 weeks. Your mother will always pressure you, always interfere in our lives, and you'll start giving in again, out of guilt, out of habit, out of fear of losing her. I've changed, he insisted. I've been in therapy, started learning about these codependent relationships. Carmen couldn't help smiling. It was so unexpected to hear that Pablo, who had always considered psychology to be women's nonsense, had turned to a specialist. That's good, she said more softly. Really, good, but I need time, Pablo. Marcos and I need time to recover, learn to feel at home again, in our own home. He nodded, not arguing, then carefully handed her the box with the console. Take it anyway, for Marcos. No strings attached, just let him have it. And if someday you'll be ready to talk? Carmen hesitated, then accepted the box. All right, but I don't promise anything, understand? I understand. He smiled slightly. Just don't close the door on me completely, okay? When Pablo left, Carmen stood in the hallway for a long time, holding the photograph with her grandmother to her chest. The old frame, the slightly worn glass, but such a dear face. She almost physically felt her grandmother's presence beside her, as if she were standing behind her shoulder and quietly advising, "Don't rush, dear. Time will put everything in its place." Marcos was delighted with the new console, though he restrained his emotions, as if afraid that Mom would not approve of a gift from the man who had left them. Can I keep it? He cautiously asked, stroking the bright box. Of course, Carmen smiled. It's for you. And him? Will he come back? Difficult question. Carmen sat down next to her son on the couch. You know, I don't know yet. Maybe someday. Right now we need a little time to figure things out for ourselves, both him and us. Marcos nodded thoughtfully, accepting this adult uncertainty. But that grandmother definitely won't come back, he specified, and there was such anxiety in his voice that Carmen hugged him tight. No, my dear, never, I promise you. In the evening, after putting her son to bed, Carmen went out onto the balcony, the very one where once, after her divorce, she had stood with a cigarette thinking about the future. Now she no longer smoked. She had quit while with Pablo. She just stood there, breathing in the warm evening air and looking at the yard she had known since childhood. Her soul was at peace. Not happy, that was still far off, but peaceful. Their little fortress was safe again. It belonged only to them again. Her phone vibrated in her robe pocket. A message from Pablo. "Thank you for talking to me today. I will wait as long as needed." Carmen looked at these words and thought that maybe, someday, they could indeed start over. But not now. Now she needed to heal the wounds, hers and Marcos's, restore faith that their home was truly their fortress. She returned to the room and placed the photograph with her grandmother in the most visible place, on the bookshelf in the living room. Next to it, that same glued cup, a symbol of their victory over circumstances, two reminders of what was and of what they overcame. Grandmother used to say, "Your home is your fortress." What a pity that understanding of this simple truth came so late and at such a high price. But it came, and that's the main thing. Carmen turned off the light in the living room and went to the bedroom. Tomorrow would be a new day, without looking back at the past, without fear of the future. Just another day in their small but so reliable fortress. And the cup remained standing on the shelf, crooked, glued, with visible cracks, but whole, like a scar, reminding that sometimes loss is actually a gain.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.